Good afternoon and welcome to those who are just joining us. I see the numbers are starting to rise for this afternoon's Beyond Brexit web chat with the Jersey Chamber of Commerce and the Government of Jersey. It's part of the Brexit week. People are just joining us, so we will wait until our numbers, which are rapidly rising. We have over 70 people registered for this web chat, and we'll be moving ahead with that very, very shortly. I'm Murray Norton. I'm the Chief Executive of the Jersey Chamber of Commerce. And alongside me is the Acting Director of Jersey Customs and Immigration Services, and that's Luke Goddard. And Luke is joining us to answer your questions. If you do have any questions, you'll find that they're in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen there. If you click on that, you can add your questions. And if you wish to make comments, then you can go into the chat box or stay in the Q&A box should you wish. This is Beyond Brexit Immigration, covering the various issues and routes to obtaining labour, new processes and requirements, and the timescales, plus a timely reminder, of course, of the Jersey EU settlement scheme, which is the JEUSS. I'm not sure if that quite spells Jesus, but it's close. Anyway, I'm delighted to say that, that Luke Goddard has joined us, and so have some 42, 43 of you already, so we'll get ourselves underway. Luke, welcome. Thank you for coming to give us some more information on Brexit. We are right in the middle of COVID and easing of restrictions and everything else, but of course, Brexit has been there for quite some time for us. We've been talking, you and I now, for, I guess, the best part of 2 years in preparation for this. We have a deal, we have an agreement on settlement scheme, and we also have an immigration controls, and we have migration policies, which are being written, and a common population policy, which has got to be written by the end of the year. So before we go any further, and it's very, very common for people to get immigration and migration confused, but can you just outline it simply for us, and what's the difference?
Yeah, very much. As everyone, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all and hopefully answer some questions. So in answer to your first question, Murray, I understand the confusion mostly because of the naming of these, and if I had my way, which maybe I will, we might even look to try and rename them because they are so similar, migration and immigration. But these really come down to two separate pieces of legislation and two pieces of control. The immigration control that we have in place in the island serves the Common Travel Area and the UK for their migration control as well. It acts as one and the same way to give permission for people to come and live and work and study and settle in the UK, whereas, as everyone is aware, we have our own domestic controls on top of that to prevent the island from becoming overpopulated or try and put controls in place to do that. So my colleagues in the Business Licensing Unit and the Population Office manage those areas. So the Control of Housing and Work Law is in place and has controls in place regardless of people's nationality. So it has nothing to do with an immigration position. It has it's a method by which we control anyone coming to the island to live and work here. So those people who do not have entitled status need the employer to have the appropriate license to be able to employ them, either registered or licensed. So there are a group of people who don't need a control because they are entitled, but there are those that do. And it makes no difference whether they are from Azerbaijan or Southampton. They come under the same rule. The immigration control is specific to nationality, but it does, in effect, duplicate some of the controls. So in other words, anybody who is not British or Irish requires an immigration permission to be here today. And that's it. The permissions that we grant depend on the person's circumstances, whether they were here before this year or last year, eligibility to the settlement scheme, or whether they may require a visa, or simply whether they're going to be here as a visitor. So those are the different areas that are there, and it serves a duplicate purpose in terms of protecting the island, as well as a control to an extent on the amount of people that can come and live and work here, in addition to the Control of Housing and Work Law. The one bit that comes together is that in order to get an immigration permission for a work permit specifically, the employer needs to have the necessary Control of Housing and Work Law permission.
Okay, So there's the connection between the two. So if you've got the necessary permission, in this case, it's more likely to be an entitled to work permission. In the majority of cases, certainly, if you've got that entitled to work permission, then you then move into the permissions for work permit, visa, and so on. The one thing that we must also almost have a glossary. There is, of course, the CTA. Now, that just refers to the UK and Irish contingent that could come into work. That's the area, the common travel area. And so that's what refers to those who are not part of requiring the permission.
Yeah, so it's better to actually, even though we refer to it as the CTA is the area in which we put the control in place for it. But if you're trying to think of those nationals that would or wouldn't require permission, it is down to their nationality. So there are plenty of people in the UK, in Ireland, and in the island, in Jersey, who are not British or Irish, but are resident here. So it is still dependent on your nationality, not necessarily where you are resident.
Okay, let's take that, and we've got some questions coming in already, and we'll deal with those in just a second. Before we do that, let's just start off having differentiated between the two there in terms of immigration permission and control of housing and work law, to look at what is the difference between someone having settled status or having a visa, because settled status has been around for, it must be getting on for about a year that you could have applied for settled status now in Jersey. So what's the difference between those two?
It's a couple of years. So this is as a result of direct results of the agreement with Brexit. And that's one of the few things that were resolved earlier on in the discussions. So the bottom line is anybody who was living here up until the end of last year has protected rights. They are guaranteed, if they are Brits living in Europe or European nationals living in the CTA in Jersey or in the UK, they have the ability to be able to remain there as a protected right to continue living, working and studying, settling, whatever they're doing. So that means that any EU national that was here at the end of last year would be eligible to the scheme. We opened the scheme a couple of years ago. And those people, therefore, once they get their settled status, or in fact, once they have applied for settled status, do not require any other form of immigration permission. The employer doesn't need a work permit. They don't need a visa. They can continue working and doing exactly what they were doing beforehand without any other kind of permission on top of that settled status. The new border and immigration system is in place to manage those who need a visa. So a visa, they're all immigration permissions. A visa is specific to a permission that is granted prior to somebody arriving here. So those people who are not eligible to the scheme, in effect, who weren't here last year and are new to the island, will require a visa if they want to do anything other than visit. And there's pretty strict parameters around visiting, but certainly those people who want to come and work for an employer over here would need both a work permit to be issued to the employer and a visa, which is applied for before you arrive to get that permission to therefore come and work here if that's the goal of the person.
Okay, that begs the question then. There's a difference between visiting and coming here for work. Does that mean that you have to have the job in place? If I was the EU national coming in, I would need to have the job in place before I came to Jersey, and also have the work permit visa permission already established before I set off on my journey to come to Jersey.
Exactly that. One of the work permit criteria is that there is a position for that person to fill.
Okay, so
absolutely.
That's quite interesting, because if you look at the way that employment has worked previously, and you know, it's an observation more than something you may need to comment on, but you can see that the difference there, where people would have pitched up in Jersey before and would have then tried to find a job, whereas now they must have the job before they pitch up. Well,
it depends on your definition of they. So that was the case for EU nationals. However, even 2-3 months ago, if you were not a European national, you would be doing exactly what European nationals are now having to do. You would have had to have a position secured and get the employer to have a work permit before you could have come across, if you were, for instance, a USA national or an Indian national. And so now, exactly the same rules, it's just a bigger cohort of people. It includes all EU nationals.
Excellent. Thanks for clarifying that. I had questions coming in. Thank you and good afternoon to our friends at the Jersey Farmers Union. A couple of questions coming in, and I'll take a couple now and then we'll come back to another one later, because they relate to settled status or pre-settled status. If an EU national has started their application for pre-settled status, and you might have to go into some detail on that, do they need to ensure that they complete it by the 30th of June of 2021, or can they finalise the paperwork when they return to the island in, say, September 2021?
Okay, so it depends a little bit on what they mean by finalised. So in order for an EU national to either remain here lawfully on the 1st of July or to return on the basis that they believe they're eligible for settled status, the application must be submitted to us by the 30th of June. Now, it doesn't matter if we haven't yet processed it and granted the permission on the 30th of June. The important thing is that the application has to be submitted. On the 1st of July, EU nationals who have not yet applied and believe they're eligible will be here unlawfully on the 1st of July. So it's vital these people get that application submitted to us. So it depends on your definition of what they mean by have started. So in other words, if you've started it online and not pressed the submit button, that is not submitted. It must be submitted to us. And in answer to the question, once that's done, there is a second part to the process, which is us then inviting people to use the YOTI application to share their nationality and identity data with us. That could possibly be at a later stage after the 30th of June.
Okay, thank you for that. Pre-settled status, we've touched on it there. The deadline is the 30th of June 2021. Now, that will apply to those who are living in Jersey right now as European nationals who have been here and can apply so that they're pre-settled. Am I right in thinking that, or have I already missed that deadline?
No, so the deadline is the 30th of June. Nobody has to have applied by now, but I would still encourage those people who haven't applied to do so as soon as possible. So the difference between pre-settled and settled: pre-settled are those people who have been here for less than 5 years, and they get, as a result of their application, a permission to remain here for 5 years, allowing them to gather the full 5 years to then make a second application, which won't cost any more, to get settled status. Settled status is for those people who have been here for more than 5 years, and this is an indefinite permission. It doesn't expire. As long as they don't leave the CTA for a continuous period of more than 5 years, they will have that indefinitely. Okay. So no one has to apply yet, but we would encourage those people to do so. Having said that, it could affect the eligibility criteria. Those people who have not yet applied and who weren't here on the 31st of December last year should apply within 6 months of having left the island. So for instance, if someone had left in June last year and is only eligible for pre-settled status, we'd need to have good reason to know why they're applying late in effect now, because the application would be over 9 months old from when they left.
Okay, it's got an interesting dynamic to add to it, and of course that, as you and I have discovered over this time, there are people who could apply for pre-settled status who have been almost unbeknown to them, despite the amount of messaging that we're now doing and have been doing previously, that have assumed because they perhaps have housing qualifications, perhaps because they own property, own businesses, have lived here for all of their life, and it could be 60, 70 years, that they don't need to apply for pre-settled status. But the fact is, if they are a European national and don't hold a UK or Irish passport, then they need to apply.
Absolutely, and this is probably going to be the most difficult cohort to get through to. And I have sympathy with them in the misunderstanding, but it's hopefully sessions like this, getting as much information out as we can to just advise those people. And I would put a cautionary message that if anyone is unsure, just either reply or come and speak to us or send us an email, and we can give you the answer as to whether you need to apply or not.
Okay, I'm just going to continue on with a couple of the questions that the Farmers Union sent in to us, because these are obviously relevant to them and some of the people that work in that sector. If a worker with an EU passport has been granted pre-settled status in the UK, can they use this status to come and work in Jersey without having to apply for a Jersey work permit? What do you make of that one?
So a couple of years ago, more than that, 3 years ago, when I started getting involved with this, I have very, very regular contact with the Home Office. One of the criteria that came about through myself, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, who regularly meet with them, was this concern. And maybe some of the hidden work that's never been seen is the great pleasure I got in finally getting this through, even though it took a bit of time, for the Home Office and all the other jurisdictions to agree that settled status granted in any jurisdiction, pre-settled or settled, will be recognised across the whole of the CTA, excluding Ireland, where you don't need the permission. But in fact, Isle of Man, Guernsey, Jersey, and the UK. So pre-settled granted here will be recognised in the UK and vice versa.
That's helpful. Thank you for that. And that will help. Certainly, obviously, one of their clients there. There is another question on this. And if an EU national doesn't have a smartphone, what other means are there to enable them to make an application for the pre-settled or settled status? So you mentioned online before, and in a lot of cases, both you and I know that a great deal of the employers who are watching this have been assisting their employees to make sure that they can get the application in. But what advice would you give them?
We are only accepting the actual applications for the scheme via an online process. So that can be done if people haven't got a smartphone, either at the library, through customer and local services, or citizens' advice have been very helpful, allowing people access to terminals there to make their applications. Once the application is made, then the second part, which is this JEUSS system of sharing the data with us, does require a person to have a smartphone. So if they don't have a smartphone at that point, we will go back to them. They need to make us aware that they haven't got one. We'll invite them in the first place to do the completion of the process by sharing their data. They need to respond saying they haven't got the ability to do that. We will offer another option, which is normally them emailing us images of their passport and another photo identity. However, if people do have a smartphone, the process is vastly quicker on our administrative side if we are able to receive it via JEUSS, which is the reason we're trying to promote it. But clearly, we understand some people haven't got access to a smartphone, so we will have that other option for them. Okay,
and actually a question from Nikki who's saying, how long will the settled scheme, is it going to take to be confirmed? There are quite a few staff that they have who've been sat at pre-settled for some time. So is there a backlog of those to clear, or are we?
Yeah, we've the COVID situation hit us quite hard because unlike the UK, we were reliant on a face-to-face appointment, even though it only took 2 or 3 minutes to be able to process the final stage of this nationality and identity process that JEUSS is now doing for us. Due to the security requirements and a number of different administrative reasons, we weren't able to launch it for quite some time. And it's just meant we do have a very big backlog. We're at about 16,000 applicants. Half of those have been granted a status, and more than half of the remaining have now received a JEUSS invitation. So we do have still the best part of 4,000 who are yet to receive that application, the invitation to complete it. However, we have now probably tripled the size of the team over the last couple of months, and we are now processing these in a far greater period. I would certainly anticipate that by the end of June, everyone will have received an invitation to at least come back to us and share that data with us. And also, we would hope that within at least a month or so after that date, any outstanding ones will have received their status as well. I need to reiterate, the fact that a person has applied to the scheme means that they have protected rights and continue to live and work here after the 30th of June, even if we have not yet granted a status.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that.
Actually, something that stuck in my mind, which is quite pleasing with the additional numbers I've got in my team now. Over the last 2 weeks, the guys managed to grant nearly 1,000 statuses, and that's nearly, it's 1/16 of the whole amount and an eighth of the whole amount that we've managed to actually grant. So they have moved forward massively quicker than they have been. And I'm hoping that number is going to increase further. So fingers crossed we'll get through this in the next couple of months much more quickly.
It's quite interesting because we are at the moment from different departments in different realms, be it COVID or Brexit or anything else, bombarded with different figures here, there and everywhere. How many, do you have a rough idea how many may be outstanding but living in the island of EU nationals without settled status? Because there must be a target between now and the 30th of June to get all of those dealt with. The last thing you want to be doing after that time is saying to people, I'm sorry, you haven't got settled status, you have to move.
I'm thinking that the results of the recent census might help us, even though they never actually asked in the census what your nationality was. There is a close indication as to what it might be due to where you were born. And so we're hoping that might help us out a little bit with this. However, there are no actual specific statistics on this, and partly because of the fact that as associate members of the EU as we were, there was no reason, data protection wise, to record a person's nationality if they were an EU national. So there was no specific record of that. Also, we have no indication of how many people might have left or arrived since any data might have been taken. Right. So the data that we've got of 20,000 was the best estimate we could come up with the data that we received from various sources, much of it coming from the honorary consuls. I would say that the number of applications that we're receiving now is reducing by the week. And because of the previous possible Brexit days we had through last year, remember last March, we saw surges coming up to those dates. And I think the two surges that we had have meant that we are now hopefully seeing that the end of those numbers coming through. Most recently, the average was, I think, under 40 a week that we're receiving in terms of new applications. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple of thousand more, but that's really just from the rates in which we're receiving applications at the moment. Well, if there are employers out there who have knowledge of their workforce, which I'm sure they do, then perhaps just an audit for each employer of their employees would certainly enable them to assist people coming forward to you. And more questions coming in. It is 23 minutes past 1. Luke is with us and we're here answering questions. When I say we, I mean Luke is answering questions. I'm just asking them quite simply, and the ones that you're mentioning as well. And a question just come in, actually, it's a comment from Sean. Thank you, Sean. Can you please confirm whether supporting documentation for work permit applications needs to be translated and how these would be certified? That's an interesting question. So this is additional documentation for a work permit application. Would that need to be translated and how would you certify it? It would depend a little bit on what it is. One of the requirements of some of the work permits is a police certificate from the country in which a person's been living in for the last 10 years. Those we wouldn't necessarily expect to be translated. They're given from an official body. But nearly every other document we would anticipate and expect them to be translated to a certified, not necessarily to a legal standard, but we would expect some kind of certification to be satisfied that they're a genuine translation. I would just also keep directly in touch with the team that look after those applications. We're dealing with them pretty regularly now, and there may be occasions where they're quite comfortable to receive particular documents without a translation. So I would do it potentially on a case-by-case basis. If there's people who are really finding difficulty in providing translated documents, then contact us directly and explain that situation, and I'm sure we can work with you to find a solution. Okay. This might get a bit technical, but what's the difference between someone having settled status or having a visa? Well, that was really what we spoke about before. So a person who has settled status or is eligible for settled status was resident here sometime prior to this year. Yes. Once they have settled status, they require no other form of immigration permission, and the employer does not require a work permit. They become, if you like, part of the CTA community. They are in the same bracket as British and Irish nationals. They can be employed in exactly the same way. Anyone who is not eligible for settled status, in other words, was not here last year and is new to the island, will require a visa to be applied for. Work permit in the first instance by the employer. Then that work permit is used to support their application for their working visa, which will be granted prior to their arrival. And that is usually for a limited time to either allow them to get settled or indefinite leave to remain after 5 years, or if it's a temporary route, just for a limited period of that work.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Just moving on to the employer for a moment. I mean, we are a business organisation at Chamber, and we have 600 different businesses as members here. Liability for employing EU nationals. What sits on the shoulders of the employer here?
So, as I explained, those people who do not apply by the 30th of June formally will be here unlawfully on the 1st of July. However, we understand that there isn't the same kind of liability here there is in the UK, where there's a specific fine in place for those people who employ those who haven't got the appropriate permissions. Here, that doesn't exist. However, part of the law is to have the appropriate registration card or license card from the Social Security Department. And we are now working with them quite closely to determine that those who get renewal or new cards have the appropriate immigration permissions. So we're satisfied that if the employer has taken the appropriate steps for that purpose, that we're not going to hold them to account for a potential liability for immigration status. However, as responsible employers, I would urge anyone who employs EU nationals to advise them of what the circumstances are and ensure they do have that. It will affect their ability to travel, possibly access to benefits, and maybe free healthcare if they don't apply and have that permission in place. I'm sure the last thing employers want is for their employees to go home and not be able to return because they hadn't applied for the appropriate status when they say they're coming back and they're going to work in Jersey and just don't have the appropriate permission. They will end up being refused at the border and have to return to the home country.
And that nobody wants. It's 28 minutes after 1. Any more questions, do let us have them in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure that we get those fired straight in to Luke, who's with us from now until 2 o'clock. Let's look at the routes, if you like. There's a skilled route and a temporary route for those who are not eligible to the scheme. With the pre-settled scheme. So in terms of immigration, skilled routes and temporary routes, there's a 9-month route.
So this again is really just an extension of the system that was in place prior to Brexit that affected everyone that wasn't European.
Yeah.
Now it affects everyone that isn't British or Irish or isn't eligible for settled status. So there are two different criteria that it in some way fits the same model as the UK, even though they refer to it as a points-based system. In effect, it offers two options. One for those who may come and work temporarily as either seasonal workers on the 9-month route, where there is not a requirement for a salary threshold, for an English test, and the downsides to it are that they can only be here for 9 months at a time, and it needs to be a break between that and their next travel in. Also, they can't bring their family dependents with them over that period, but they can keep returning. We've then introduced very recently, and that particular route is only available for agriculture, fisheries, and also for hospitality. So if you have a position outside of those routes, then there isn't a route available for that temporary position for 9 months. The construction industry came to us and made a business case which was accepted by the minister, and we've now introduced a 1-year route for construction workers on the same basis, the same kind of controls. However, this can be renewed for up to 4 years, the catch being that following your period of permission as a construction worker, you must then be absent for that period. So in other words, if you came for instance, 18 months, you must then be absent for 18 months before you could return. The whole idea is this is a temporary route. It's not a route that you can just continually remain here and eventually lead to settlement. Which leads me on to the skilled routes. The skilled routes are those people who have potentially a higher academic or vocational level of work through experience or qualification, and may be able to fill a position that will normally require a £30,000 salary threshold. You will need a particular qualification, usually to a level of RQF3, And at that point, you can then come fill one of the roles that we list in our work permit policy. It's about 100 of them in there. And they can take those positions up. They will normally be granted an initial permission of about 3 years. That can normally be extended to 5 years, at which point they are eligible for indefinite leave to remain. They make that application, and in effect, indefinite leave to remain is settled status. It's one and the same thing. And once they achieve that, they have no further immigration controls. They can do as the settled status people can at the moment.
And the 100 different skilled route vocations, if you like, jobs, they can bring family in for more than a year.
It's actually the criteria is whether we give leave for more than a year or not. So the initial leave that's granted to a temporary worker will never exceed 1 year. But if it was extended beyond that, or in fact, if a skilled worker potentially could get a permission for less than a year, depending on what kind of work they wanted to do, they also would not be able to bring in their dependents. So it's if the leave either is initially for longer than a year, or they get to the point where it becomes more than a year.
Okay, just going back to the 9-month temporary route for agfish and hospitality, that's 9 months. What's the gap in between before they can return? Because you do get a lot of returning seasonal workers that come back year after year.
3 months.
3 months. Okay, so it's a 3-month gap between, and then they can return again for another 9 months if they're a seasonal worker.
It was all set up as seasonal work. We appreciate that some of the work doesn't really fit our I suppose climate seasons anymore, so it doesn't really matter how those 9 months fit, but there needs to be an absence of 3 months.
Okay. And in terms of if I may just talk costs on these, and I don't know if you've got the cost to hand, but in terms of the skilled routes and the temporary routes, for those who are eligible to come in for those, there are costs involved, aren't there?
Yeah, I should have them to hand, but I've got them pretty much off the top of my head. So the work permits, in the first instance, these payments get made to us, and the 9-month route, I think, is 115, and a year is 175. For the longer ones, if for a skilled worker who might get a work permit for 3 years, off the top of my head, it's 250. It's around that mark. I'd have to check. And then the visa applications initially are made to the UK, and you make your payment to the UK. We use their infrastructure, so they take the benefit of the payments on this. The temporary routes for 9 months or a year are £244 per year or per 9 months. And the skilled routes, I think I'm right in saying it starts 604, which would be a 3-year permission to come in at that point.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. Question in from Sabine, who says, how is the immigration status checked at the Jersey border?
Oh, I could tell you, but I have to kill you.
Yeah, it's so tough.
It's pretty basic, if you like. We have a system which is shared with the UK. When you come through the border, you've probably seen our guys in uniform take your passport, they stick it into a machine and give you some niceties, and then your passport back, and on you go. That system gives us access to the immigration permissions that a person might have if it is not already actually in your passport. Now, this system is developing for Europeans. At the moment, we don't have some of that information on there, but we do have access to those people who have permission granted in Jersey currently available, so that our border officers can see that immediately for those people who've made application or not. But it leads me quite nicely into the settled status checker that we're going to be introducing, I hope, this week. If I can get my data protection impact assessment officer to get going a bit quicker, we may even get it this week, or hopefully next week at the latest, which is the ability for individuals to be able to check their own status and present that to a third party should they need to.
Right, thank you. Thank you for that. And I wanted to move on from that to, if you like, the work permit, permission and visa process. Just in terms of the process for that, employers and employees have a lot of different processes to go through. So the work permit application is online, and that goes to you?
Yes, it does. It's worth a mention, I suppose, that we spoke about control of housing and work law. Ensure you've got that sorted first. A prerequisite for the work permit, the immigration work permit, is that you have the appropriate license in place for your intended employee. So that's one thing to check first.
Right.
Then the application for the work permit is an online application that is submitted to us. We're turning them around, I think, in about a little over, certainly under 2 weeks at the moment. I think our SLA is 3 weeks. So you can bank on getting a response back in that period. Once that has been received, so the employer applies for the work permit, we grant it to the employer to employ an individual, and that individual then applies for the visa. They would probably need a copy of that work permit to present as part of their application for the visa. It does eventually get referred to us. The work permit is more of a check that the employer's done the right thing, and the immigration, the visa check, is more about the individual's circumstances, which is why there are two separate checks in that way. And the other requirement for the visa is for the individual to enroll their biometrics. So within that process, they'll probably be invited to attend a visa application centre, which is normally in the capital city of the country they live in. They don't have to be. It could be in another, if they're living in a different country from where their nationality is, they could use the visa application centre that's nearest to them.
So there is a process that they've got to go through here, and it's not for us to comment on how good or bad that is. It just happens. It's a matter of fact that that's what it is. But here, the employee applies for the visa to the UK website and uses the work permit permission to support. Just to reiterate that, and then at some point they've got to enrol their biometrics to a visa application centre, which is near to them, which may be the capital city.
I can add to that we're in discussions with the UK to widen their current they've got a process which allows people to enrol biometrics for certain routes, not temporary routes anyway, to use a smartphone in order to do that, similar to Yoti, in fact. But that isn't yet available for us, but we hope this is something we can introduce over the next year or so.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to go back because questions coming in. Andy, thank you for your question. For a temporary 9-month employee wanting to return after 3 months absence, does the whole registration process have to begin again, or does the previous work permit and visa roll over for the next 9-month period?
No, the whole process needs to be repeated. However, certainly for the work permit situation for us, it's usually a quicker process because we already know the person. And equally for the individual, the process is usually quicker because they're more familiar with it as much as anything else.
Okay, so it starts over again, but it should be easier because we've got all the information to start off with. Thank you, Andy, for your question. Any more questions, then do let us know. We've got 20 minutes left. Actually, a question's just coming from Sean, who's using the chat box, and I'll try and paraphrase this best I can. Thank you, Sean. Do we have an idea on the time frame from when an employee receives their work permit and applies for a visa until this is approved and accepted? How long will it take? I guess for employers and the employees, it's good to know how long this process will take. Yeah,
so control of housing and work, I'm not 100% sure, but for us, as I said, our SLA for the work permit is 3 weeks, but we're under that quite considerably at the moment. The visa application, they're trying to reduce this in the UK. It used to be quite a long process, but they're now turning them around, I understand, within about 4 or 5 weeks of application. And that's the longer period of doing that. So that's the kind of time period you can look out for something like a temporary work permit, a temporary route for a visa.
Okay, more questions coming in. Thank you very much for these. Jane says, if a temporary work permit process for someone returning is easier, is there any chance of reducing the cost for the 9-month work permit? It might be beyond your gift, Lou. But...
No, I don't mean to belittle that. We align our fees with that of the UK so that we don't both make ourselves more inviting than the UK or vice versa. For the prices, for the fees. So the fees are in effect fixed for those visa or leave to remain for the permissions.
Okay, so They match those in the UK, and they match them for a good reason. Thank you for that, and thank you for the questions that we've had so far. If you've got other questions, then please do let me know what they are as soon as possible using the Q&A box, if you wouldn't mind, and then we can spot them easy enough and get them straight through to Luke. Let's talk about late applications for the settlement scheme. How do you work with that for those who may not have applied by the 30th of June?
So we will be, in effect, closing the application process for those people who have not already got pre-settled, because people who have pre-settled need to apply for settled status. So it will remain open for those people to come back to us. But the first applications for people who've basically either, for whatever reason, not made their application, they're likely to have to get in touch with us directly for us to determine the reasons why that has been late. We are fully aware there are people in vulnerable situations, people who potentially have bigger domestic concerns than whether their immigration permission is appropriate, and have bigger worries. And we will look at those circumstances sympathetically and allow people to make late application. Importantly, those also who do receive a late permission will have the permission granted retrospectively, so there isn't a gap in their ordinary residence, particularly if they're trying to get a period of residence for control of housing and work law permissions. So that will be a benefit for them for that. But for those people who've deliberately avoided it, we may be in a different circumstance, but certainly we'll be sympathetic to those people who have good reasons for not applying by the end of June. Okay,
all right. So 30th of June, by that time, and again, Chamber is pushing that as much as possible. I know the government is doing the same. It is part of the process that there is a cut-off deadline, 30th of June, and if you have knowledge of those who are EU nationals who would ordinarily feel that they are in a good position to remain, they must, of course, apply for the EU settled status. Another question that's coming in: will visas need to be needed for traders coming in from France or the EU for a few days as part of a market? That's a good question. We have the French market down in the Weybridge area there, people coming in for a week or maybe 2 weeks to work in the island. How do they fare?
Nice pun. So the good news is that these smaller pockets of people are ones that I hope we have managed to identify. And specifically, in fact, just I think in the last week, we've made our own changes to the rule, which is actually different to that of the UK's. Again, exercising the ability we have to have some differentiation from the UK immigration rules, where we have specifically built in a criteria for a permission for those people to come in and undertake their own trade. In other words, set up a store for the period of an organised fair, specifically to adapt for those people coming over with the French fairs. So that is there, allowing those people to continue to do so. It's also relevant to maybe go on to the next point, which we've spoken about before, Murray, about those people who maybe not be traders. There's another exception to the visitor rule, which means that an EU worker could come over as long as their period of work is under 6 months and they are employed by a company who is the same company that has supplied some goods to you. So, for instance, if you are having windows fitted by a German window manufacturer who want to send their own fitters over, and they're going to be able to do that within, let's say, a 2-week period, they would not require a visa to come and do that. They wouldn't require any particular permission. There's no work permits because they're not employed by somebody here. They're employed by somebody in Germany. So that's the general rule. If there was particular circumstances that individuals were concerned about whether it fitted within that rule, they can always contact us for some clarity.
Just looking at that, though, the employing of EU subcontractors, that does happen. It happens in the building trade a reasonable amount as well, where people are coming and going. But you still need to know who those people are and whether, I mean, presumably they'll get identified anyway as they're coming through customs.
Yeah, they'll still need to be granted that permission as they come. They won't need a visa, so they don't need prior permission. But at the border, we'd need to be satisfied they are indeed here for less than 6 months. They are indeed not employed by somebody locally. So you've got to be careful with the word subcontractors. So, you know, you have to be fitting an item that is supplied by your employer. So this doesn't allow for the fact that you want to employ an EU plumber on a building site simply because he's a good plumber. He's not fitting items that have been supplied by a particular EU supplier.
Okay, it's quite nuanced, but it certainly needs pointing out. Had somebody come in and said that half of their staff have received their settled status, and the others are at a pre-settled status, awaiting, and are quite nervous. They don't need to be nervous. If they have acknowledgement, they will be dealt with, and they won't be timed out or anything like that.
Absolutely, and I really have sympathy with people, and I take it on my own shoulders that we have this huge delay for a number of people that isn't the case in the UK. But absolute assurance, as long as they've received confirmation that their application has been submitted, and they're satisfied that it has been submitted, they're safe. You know, they have that permission. Their protected rights remain until we process that application and grant the permission. This brings me back to the status checker. Individuals are going to be able to use this as well. This is an online, looks like an application form. The individual puts in their name, date of birth, JEUSS security, social security number, and their passport number, and it will email them their live status. One of those being that you have an application submitted and it's been processed. So this is something you can present to an employer if you need to, or just get your own satisfaction that it's in hand.
That's a clever little nifty app, isn't it?
I will take all the credit.
Yes, well, I would if I was you, Luke. I think it was all your design. Well done, you. But so where do people find that?
It's all built. It's in our test site, all tickety-boo, ready to go. We are literally waiting for a sign-off from our data protection independent officer from outside of the service to confirm that it's good. But because we're not processing any data, all we're doing is allowing access for an individual to access their own data and send it back to them. I'm comfortable that it's all there. It's just the wheels of administration turning. So I'm literally hoping we are within days of that tick in the box, and then I can get it online. It'll be available on gov.je, probably mixed up with some of our settlement scheme websites as well. People just need to search for immigration status checker, and it'll be there to help you as employers, which is worth explaining. The response as to whether what someone's status is emailed to their personal email address for one of the data protection requirements. But presented on the bottom of the application page is a specific unique reference number, which will appear in the title of the email that the person gets. So if the person is willing to allow you to make the application, you will see that number, and you will then be able to verify that the email they get isn't one that they just written themselves and presented to you, because it will have that unique reference number that matches the, if you like, the application for it.
Okay, just talking about employers and them assisting, are you seeing that a great deal, that it's actually the employers that are saying, right, okay, I've got 20 staff, let's just go through, 7 of those are EU nationals, we're going to do a process by which we assist them to do that. So you're seeing a lot of applications coming in from the employers on behalf of the employee?
In a roundabout way we are. I've only had 2 or 3 come to me as groups. Some of the bigger groups have come to me who employ a lot of EU nationals, asking about the process they need to follow. What should they be doing? What shouldn't they be doing? How should they do it? Very much what we've just been talking about. So that some of the bigger organizations have looked at this, but I hope that the majority have just undertaken this themselves to do that. We would, the advice we're giving today is something I can give in writing if it assists those people who want to be sure of their situation. People like Liberty Buses, Post Office has come through and spoken to me, and Liberation Group. So yeah, and on behalf. Good,
excellent. We are just wrapping up here, but thank you very much indeed for all the questions we've had. If there is another quick question, make it now or send it to us afterwards, and we'll forward it on to Luke. We will also have a recording available of this this web chat, so that it will, and we'll make sure that people know what the link is for that, so they can watch it again to get further information. But if people want further information online, which is where people tend to search, I found that the Immigration and Migration Controls 2021, a guide for business, which we will send to everyone afterwards, really useful, because it does give a whistle-stop tour of what we've been talking about here and some of the differences. So is that the go-to? I mean, there's plenty online, isn't there?
Yeah, we contributed to that, and it is a very useful document. Probably the next best one is one that's entitled, to search myself over your head, but it's I think it's entitled visa requirements for visiting Jersey. I think something along those lines. Certainly, if you search visas within the Government of Jersey website, you'll find that page. That will pin down and give you the information on specifically who needs a work permit, who doesn't, and how you go about that process. So yeah, that's a useful site.
And as somebody has just sent in, will there be an FAQs available following this webinar? Thank you. So an FAQ?
Yeah, we've produced a few before. There isn't one available on the website, but there's no reason why I couldn't get one together, and I'm sure it'd be useful. So yes, I can do that. Pass it through you, Murray, if you're happy to pass it out to Chamber members.
I'm happy to pass it through. You've just got to do all the work, that's all. But yeah, as you know, that's usually the deal. Luke, yeah. We'll look forward to receiving that, and we'll make sure that everyone watching this gets that information, and that we put it up onto our information on Chamber, jerseychamber.com, just to make sure that it's all up there for employers as they need. This has been part of a series which Jersey Business started at the beginning of the week, talking beyond Brexit, which is part of a government initiative in conjunction with Jersey Business and the Jersey Chamber of Commerce. Our thanks to Grant Thornton, who have been our sponsors for today to ensure that this web chat has happened. But mostly our thanks to those who asked the questions, and to you, Luke, for joining us to this lunchtime. I know you've got plenty of work to get on with, so we'll let you get on with it. And I know you've got other meetings to go to as well. I think that's all of our questions answered. So I shall wish you a good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Luke. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Murray. Thanks. Bye-bye.